shocker that the people who see everything through the lens of race and sex see their election loss as a result of racism and sexism.
I know that as a country, it's very difficult for people to believe that racism and misogyny, they're just alive and well. I think that we don't want to think that about ourselves, our neighbors, our friends, but it's my lived experience tells me that it does still exist.
I would say to Bill Maher, who I like, whose show I've been on several times, that maybe, just maybe, when you live life as a woman and as a woman of color, you feel it and you know it a little bit more than a white man does in America.
Bill Maher ignited a storm with his sharp takedown of The View, blasting their fixation on identity politics and what he sees as a warped take on America's political reality. In a tense back and forth, the panel fiercely defended their stance on racism, sexism, and voting patterns, but Maher didn't flinch. He slammed the left for drifting from real-world concerns like the economy and safety, chasing ideology over impact. The result? A fiery clash that left viewers split and exposed just how fractured today's political discourse has become.
And the Wall Street Journal claims that the shift to the right in this election reveals that Americans view themselves as belonging to a particular economic class more than their race and gender. And Bill Maher said it's not the only thing Democrats got wrong. Take a look.
Someone must tell the usual suspects on the far left that the saying is, when you're in a hole, stop digging. You just lost a crazy contest to an actual crazy person. What a shocker that the people who see everything through the lens of race and sex see their election loss as a result of racism and sexism. If we weren't so irredeemably unenlightened, we would have elected a black president by now. Oh, what, we did? Asked if racism is built into our society. White progressives agreed with that, at higher levels than black and Hispanic people. They don't want your pity. And black people can't afford to indulge rich white people's need to endlessly flagellate themselves. They just want prices to go down and good jobs and the police when you call them.
Well, if he's right, then why didn't people vote for the former prosecutor who actually had policy plans to help the working class? Again, I got my popcorn. I don't know why people did what they did. I see all these reasons. And so, okay, time will tell. But what do y'all think?
I know that as a country, it's very difficult for people to believe that racism and misogyny, they're just alive and well. I think that we don't want to think that about ourselves, our neighbors, our friends. But it's my lived experience tells me that it does still exist, even if your lived experience doesn't tell you that it exists. And, the facts support that. I think we have a graph. If you look at there's a clear racial divide in who voted for Trump as opposed to who voted for Kamala Harris. It's very clear. It's not only clear by race, but it's also clear by education. And so the notion somehow that is not true. This is by education. Those who attended college voted for her at a higher degree than those that didn't.
In his usual no-filter style, Maher ripped into progressive elites, urging them to ditch the empty narratives and focus on real issues that actually affect everyday Americans. His blunt critique sparked outrage on The View, where Sunny Hostin and Whoopi Goldberg came out swinging. Hostin fired back, saying racism and sexism still run deep, especially clear to women of color, unlike Maher. She tied Trump's voter base to low education and racial tension, contrasting it with Kamala Harris's diverse, educated supporters. Goldberg slammed those who brush off identity politics, arguing it's key to understanding systemic inequality. To them, Maher's comments weren't just off. They were part of a wider refusal to face hard truths, igniting a fierce, polarized clash.
The point is they didn't vote for him because of racism and misogyny. They voted for him because they felt like, I think the biggest common denominator in this election is people want a good life and ability to provide for their family.
Well,
and whether we agree or not with Donald Trump's plans,
black people
they thought that he was reflective.
One of the poorest demographics in this country, but they voted for Kamala Harris.
Such a desire. If you really think the vast majority of this country voted because of racism and misogyny.
I didn't
You're
say the
missing
vast-
it. Most of my
I didn't say
family,
the vast
a lot of my
majority,
family doesn't
Alyssa,
have college
but
degrees.
The stats are the stats.
But that's not, it doesn't say
They're the-
I'm
they're
white,
the-
I voted for Donald Trump because of racism. That's not, let me just ask, what stat are you talking about?
You can't dissect the
Yes, you
two.
can. There's a lot
Hold
more
on, a breath.
Well,
Take a beat.
well, let me jump in here because I think, Sunny, what you say is valid, and I think absolutely that is part of the problem. But when we hang our hat on that's the only problem, or
No
the
one's
main,
saying it's the only.
I'm not saying you are, but I'm saying the backlash is that when people hang their hat on that being the only reason, any criticism of Vice President Harris must be because she's a woman or she's black. I voted for, thank you, I voted for Hillary Clinton, qualified. I voted for Vice President Kamala Harris because more of my values fell in line with what she stood for. So all of that can be true. There is something here to the socioeconomic class, though, that is crossing racial divide in academic and education, too. Americans with a college degree 30 years ago were roughly 20% of the population and held the same percentage of household wealth as those without a degree. Yeah. 30 years later, this is important, Americans with a college degree account for 38% of the population and 73% of the household wealth. The haves and the have-nots have gone so far apart that they are rising up right now, and they cross every line of our democracy.
The growing gap between education and politics is widening America's ideological divide, with college-educated voters leaning left and those with less formal education favoring conservatives. As wealth becomes concentrated among graduates, political polarization deepens. Critics slam universities as breeding grounds for progressive dogma, not real-world skills, fueling working-class resentment. Shows like The View are accused of silencing conservative voices while pushing a liberal agenda, with rumors of hiring a pro-Trump host met with doubt. Many see it as performative tokenism, not true balance. It all reflects a deeper crisis. Media echo chambers replacing real political dialogue.
Go ahead.
I think most people are not saying that it was all about sexism and it was all
one's saying
about
that.
people are not saying that. I would say to Bill Maher, who I like, whose show I've been on several times, that maybe, just maybe, when you live life as a woman and as a woman of color, you feel it and you know it a little bit more than a white man does in America. And so I'm not saying, he says that folks see everything through the lens of racism and sexism. Not everything. But if you're not seeing racism and sexism in America, then you need to clean your lenses.
But if I
Because,
can
this is something that I find interesting, that when Democrats and liberals talk about race or sexism, it's immediately labeled as identity politics, which has a negative connotation. It's a term that Republicans have coined, and it's been very effective.
The clash over racism and sexism lays bare the sharp divide in how politics handles identity. Bill Maher calls out progressives for too often labeling criticism as bigotry, shutting down debate instead of engaging with real policy issues, an approach he sees as alienating and counterproductive. Meanwhile, The View hosts argue that racism and sexism are baked into American systems, shaping everything from votes to laws. Ignoring that, they say, just deepens inequality. The identity politics debate adds fuel to the fire. Democrats face backlash for outreach efforts seen as pandering, while critics warn that overusing the term identity politics turns it into a hollow jab, stripping it of meaning and killing real conversation. In the end, both sides keep missing each other, stuck in echo chambers instead of fixing the root problems.